This episode is brought to you by Progressive.
Are you driving your car or doing the laundry right now? Podcasts go best when they're bundled with another activity, like Progressive home and auto policies. They're best when bundled too.
Having these two policies together makes insurance easier and could help you save. Customers who save by switching their home and car insurance to Progressive save over $775 on average.
Quote a home and car bundle today at progressive.com.
Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. National average 12-month savings of $779 by new customers surveyed who saved with Progressive between June 2022 and May 2023. Potential savings will vary, not available in all states.
Welcome to the Intrazone, a show about the SharePoint Intelligent Intranet. I'm Mark Cashman, Senior Product Manager on the SharePoint team at Microsoft. Today, in our guest segments, Chris and I, my cohort, will be talking with Julie Turner from Sympraxis Consulting and Antoine Faisandier and Juan Larios from Powell Software. The focus of this episode is all about how developers and end users can work best together, mostly how they can talk and understand what each other does in the context of building out custom solutions, and of course the experience of when developers are using the SharePoint framework and building custom code, how that plays into what actually the users need and how they can best talk to each other about those needs. We'll get a perspective on this, both from Julie Turner from Sympraxis Consulting and talk with Antoine and Juan from Powell about what they do and how they approach using some of the new modern development techniques, specifically how they're using the SharePoint framework in the context of helping build out the intranet, like a platform, adding their components, but having that all make sense and be what it is that is a great user experience. We'll then focus on articles this week. We've got one good FAQ for you that has come up a lot to me, and I hope you like the answer. We'll certainly make sure we answer it with clarity and talk about some upcoming events and how you can get a hold and link to all the things that we mentioned today. Since this episode is all about developers, here are some interesting developer-oriented news and announcements that we've recently made and are now starting to actually flow out or are coming very soon for both SharePoint and OneDrive and how they relate. At the SharePoint conference, we talked a lot about what is new coming for developers, and a lot, again, is about how those developers can make unique and custom experiences that flow within the context of what it is the user experience already is, so that they can build and extend, but not in a way that looks different, that is actually a very consistent experience. The first thing we're doing, some of it is just how to get that technology out. With the SharePoint framework, they're now including deployment tools, so that if you have a unique experience you're building for one site or one page, or you're just wanting to put in a new web part, and have that be available in more than one site. There are some new software deployment tools that are now coming out to make that a lot easier for once you're done with your solution to be able to then propagate it across all sites, pages, and make it available to end users in a much more systematic fashion. We're also plugging into the Microsoft Graph and Azure Active Directory to make access a lot more seamless based on your permissions and your authentication service so that the SharePoint framework can more easily tie into some of those authentication services. The other thing we're doing is to make sure that what you're building in the SharePoint framework actually goes beyond SharePoint, so that if you're building a SharePoint framework web part or a connector piece or some logic, you can actually bring that into Microsoft Teams as an experience. We've done this already with Pages and News, but now imagine that you build a widget or a web part that connects to another service or pulls in data from across Office 365, and that unique component you've thought in terms of a web part on a SharePoint page can now actually be brought in as a tab. The whole web part or custom solution can actually be brought in as a tab in Teams. And then finally, there's a lot that they're doing around the Office UI fabric and how that can be a consistent component that you can use across your custom solutions to, again, make it a consistent experience for everything that users are doing, whether that's in clients, whether that's through the service, in SharePoint, Teams, Yammer. There's a lot that they're doing to make that consistent experience available to program against for developers to be able to use the look and feel in addition to the custom code that they're working on. If you want to follow and learn more about what the development team is doing, you can follow @OfficeDev. to keep up with the latest and join in their recurring community webinars. They often tweet out in advance, of course, their webinars that are coming up, and they always have really interesting topics, great speakers, and of course, keeping you on the pulse of what you can do as a developer. And even if you're just generally interested in development and what's possible, you'll learn a lot in terms of their demos, their shared code, and it's a really great community. If you ever heard of the Patterns and Practices, the folks that lead that Patterns and Practices community lead those calls, so definitely follow them at Office Dev. For this episode's guest, my cohort Chris McNulty and I talked with Julie Turner from Sympraxis Consulting. Julie had a lot of great things to share on how people, especially end users, can best talk and understand what it is the developers are saying, and vice versa, just that value of how developers can best approach people so that they can come to a conclusion of what the best solution is, and of course then work together throughout the whole process. So let's take a listen.
So our next guest is Julie Turner from Sympraxis Consulting. Julie is an Office Servers and Services MVP, and we're joining her today to talk about the role of the developer. Hi, Julie.
Hi, Chris. How are you?
Good.
Great to talk to you today.
Could you tell us a little bit about Sympraxis and what you do there?
Sympraxis Consulting was started originally by Mark Anderson. I joined him as sort of a partner of sorts. You know, we're like a Venn diagram of each other. We overlap in the sense that we both do a lot of client-side development, but I'm definitely much more the server, full stack dev, and he tends to have a lot more knowledge in the user sphere, information architecture, that kind of stuff. We do consulting for Office 365, SharePoint on-prem, SharePoint in the cloud, and Azure.
It sounds like at Sympraxis, you guys have lots of conversations with lots of people. And I think one of the things that we wanted to touch into was, how do you talk to people, your clients, the people that are interested in hiring you and working with you, whether it's on-prem or online, whether it's you or when you and Mark are meeting with customers, how do you talk to them when they're not a developer, when they don't know deep SharePoint? What are some of those things that you help guide them through?
So anytime a new customer reaches out or just somebody reaches out and wants to talk to us, we're more than happy to just have that conversation. And it's either, mostly it's on the phone, but sometimes it's in person. And we just sit down and sort of say, where are you? What are you trying to do with Office 365 or SharePoint on-prem? What have you done in the past? What are you trying to do? What are your pain points? And then we just sort of have a conversation and let them sort of speak about how it's either working or not working for them and where they'd like to get to. And between Mark and I, again, Mark being more the information architect and user person, although I can do that too. It's not what I love to do. I love to write server integrations and that kind of thing. So, between the two of us, we're able to sort of speak to anything they might bring up, whether it be, where they'd like to integrate, their SharePoint systems with some of their back-end systems or do data reporting or whatever, or they're having problems with their end users getting their documents in libraries in the right way and managing their data, so whatever that might be. We have those conversations. And so, like I said, we call that talk therapy, and that's usually how it starts.
I think one of the things that we're hoping to do throughout the series is make technology meaningful to the everyday user. And if you think about how SharePoint and Office 365 have been on a journey, if you looked at it 10 years ago, it was very much a platform that also was an application, but you had to do a lot of to SharePoint to make it usable for people. And if
if you wanted anything other than a list or a library, that's right. Probably very true.
And if you flash forward to now, we're definitely, I think, shifted the balance somewhat. So there's a lot more things that just come in the box. And I think about what one of my old bosses, Gary, used to say. His buying decision for IT was always, buy the best, build the rest. And so what's interesting, I think, in your role is it sort of is incumbent on you to do the opposite of what we do at Microsoft. Microsoft, we explain everything that you can do with what we already have. And you sort of have to get into a discussion, I would think, about how to do things that you can't do with what Microsoft gives you.
Absolutely. And one of the things that's hardest for me, too, is I always have to check myself not to jump to a dev solution first, even though often I could build something almost as fast as I could configure it. I always want to try to think about that first. And it almost bit me the other day. We were talking to a client, and I'm like, they wanted to roll up content from multiple locations, basically tasks, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we were talking about it, and my first mental jump was, I can just quickly build a SharePoint framework web part that, uses search and pulls that content, from all those different locations. And then I thought to myself, wait a second. It's got the highlighted content web part. Can it do what I need it to do today? And so that's sort of the other part of it, right? Is keeping up. It's so much harder for consultants and us MVPs to be on top of it all the time. What we couldn't do yesterday, can we do today? And so it's that constant, okay, the client has this problem. Is there a way for me to solve it out of the box? If not, what do I build, and how far do I go before I say maybe we should just do what we can out of the box and wait because it might come, So
Right.
It's a constant juggling act.
If you're building kind of in the dark matter outside of where we light up SharePoint, are there any very common patterns or things that people ask you to augment SharePoint with?
Search, I think, is the one. It's always going to. Well, I say search, and I guess I'm saying the solution is search. But the thing that I often see is we need to bring content from various places together and display it in one place, right? And by various places, I mean crossing site collections. Obviously, there's ways to do it within a site collection, and those kind of still are there. But the cross-site collection roll-up and surfacing of data is probably the one that we do customizations for most often, if it's not a line of business application. That's the other thing we do. Probably, I would say 90% of the work that Mark and I do is going to be line of business solutions sitting on top of SharePoint. And there'll be, purists out there who might say often, well, shouldn't you back that with a SQL Server database and build a web application or a client app, Windows app or whatever for that? But it's just often not feasible, right? The onus on how much else you'd have to build, the security and version management and all those other things you'd have to build in order to build that solution is sometimes way overkill for just, task tracking that's, particularly customized to whatever that is being done, and that they need a particular user experience for that.
When you mentioned, your biggest focus and what you really like to do is that connector between servers, or maybe in this world it's evolving into services in servers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
But if you take the sort of broader pattern and practice that we're prescribing, which is the SharePoint framework, and everything that goes with that are giving you new tools and how you can accomplish things client side and more in the cloud, and maybe even lighter weight solutions in the mix of what it is you're building. How do you first describe the SharePoint framework to your customer that might not be a developer? And off of that, how would you coach somebody, whether they're talking to you or just general notion for all our listeners, how when they ask questions to developers, what they should ask about? So a little FYI, here's what the SharePoint framework is. And once you have that knowledge, what are some of the questions when working with a developer?
Yeah, so the SharePoint framework is really simply the formalization of client-side development that, people like Mark have been doing since the 2007 version of SharePoint. So in general, there's two ways to write code, right? You write code, and then the developer presses a button, and it becomes this file that is then executable on a desktop or on a server or in times of old within SharePoint. And the work was done by the server. In the SharePoint framework world and in client-side development in general, that code is written and it executes in the browser. And so, I think what probably happened is that Microsoft sort of saw that people were doing this more and more and more, in that they were writing this client-side code or JavaScript and putting it in content editor web parts or script editor web parts, but there was no development process around that. There was no change control, no, application lifestyle management that formal computer software development goes through, right? And so I think what was wonderful is that they just embraced it. They said, okay, if everybody wants to write client-side code, and that's the way, the modern web browsers are going anyway, or modern websites are going anyway, we're going to embrace that, and we're going to allow a way for developers or to write custom solutions that have a formal deployment process into SharePoint. And so that's what the SharePoint framework ended up being. It's just the formalization of writing that client-side code and being able to manage it within your SharePoint environment, know where they are, be able to sort of manage it centrally, et cetera, et cetera. So that's what the SharePoint framework is. As far as what questions to ask, it's more around making sure that you're not developing or that you're not having developed for you client-side solutions that probably already exist in out-of-the-box solutions, if that's the case. So just making sure you're having the conversation about what the developer is developing it and why they're developing it, and making sure that there's a sort of view towards making it as customizable as possible. So if you're building a solution that does a search result, if that could be configurable in some ways, because we have properties that we can set on these web parts that we develop, if we can make them flexible, that makes it more usable to the customer that's purchasing it. So always trying to think through why you're building a customization. Is there a better way, or is that the best way to do it?
Yeah, and interestingly enough, kind of a topic that comes up a lot is just that concept around change management. And the reason why I brought it up here is as I heard you, what really I think you're saying as far as a great question to ask is, does this already exist? Can we literally more buy versus build? And I think just that awareness, especially maybe for developers out there, of what is available. So maybe you don't have to build it, and what you're going to build would be a better use of your time. But also for the people that are hiring developers or hiring people to come up with solutions, it's really nice if they're up to speed on everything that is available to them and not thinking what was SharePoint, 5 years ago, 2 years ago, which is a harder nut to crack because you certainly, keeping up to speed on a service versus a product is a little harder. But that's what I heard when I heard you say that, and that sounds like really good advice.
I'm curious. So, if I were coming to you as a client and asking about, you mentioned you could do things with this framework, or you do server-side things. Why should I care about doing it one way or another? How is something that gets built in SharePoint framework going to be more beneficial to me as the end user than other approaches?
As an end user, I don't know that particular matter. You know what I mean? The end user shouldn't know the difference. That's what I would hope, right? The end user should just see something, beautiful and usable with a great user experience, and they shouldn't really care whether it's a first-party or a third-party solution. And by that I mean, one of the other things about the SharePoint framework is that not only is it a development framework for us outside of Microsoft to use, but it's also the framework that Microsoft itself is using to write its own first, web parts that are available out of the box.
Really?
So
I think it's important to know, that is not something that we're just putting out there and hoping that people do it, but we've got a secret, tricky way to do it internally. More and more is built off of the SharePoint framework, the Microsoft Graph, patterns and practice that we adhere to is what we're promoting and hoping others do as well.
Well, that's exactly it, right? So there's so many people out there that are contributing to patterns and practice SharePoint framework web parts that are highly configurable. I mean, for instance, the Shire Corporation built 3, and I believe there will be a 4th web part that they're using to build their whole modern intranet, and they're extraordinarily flexible. I mean, they allow you to just pretty much source your data and display it in ways that are very configurable. And so those might work for a significant number of other organizations by just taking that as a source place to start and then tweaking it so that it's maybe exactly what your styling needs to be or whatever that is. So that's the thing, right? It's the keeping on top of what's being put out there, luckily, the Patterns and Practices group has this great repository of things that have been built and that others can take advantage of and then modify to be their own. That doesn't mean there's not a place for still, one-offs. The other thing with web parts, right, and I said this earlier, Mark and I do a significant amount of our work is, that one-off line of business solution. And what I found is with the web part, in our instances, we can use and create a web part that's a one-off web part that we're deploying only to the site collection, because that's a new thing with the app catalog. We don't have to deploy it to the tenant now, so that it's a tenant-wide deployment, meaning that it could be used in any of the site collections. We can now deploy it so that it's just specifically targeted for one site collection. And again, from a security perspective, that's an interesting paradigm, right? We can say we're just going to have this site collection, it's this line of business application, and we're targeting the SharePoint framework solution directly to that site collection, so that we've kind of siloed it. It's kind of like what we used to have in previous versions of SharePoint, where we would have farm solutions and we'd have sandbox solutions. So
right.
this is sort of that paradigm come back to us, and I think that's pretty powerful.
Well, Julie, that was great. Thanks a lot for joining us today. So where can folks go to learn more about what you're doing and what Sympraxis is doing?
So our website is sympraxisconsulting.com, which is SYMPRAXISCONSULTING.com. And you can follow me on Twitter. My handle is JFJ1997. And so that's probably the best ways to see what's going on in our world.
We appreciate your time today. We appreciate everything you do for the community, and certainly keep driving those server and services connections. And certainly, I hope, keep driving the feedback to us so that we know what needs to do so that we can give you more tools to play with.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me.
Let's dive into articles of the week. We chose one article by nature of it speaks directly to what it is we're trying to get across in this episode. The article comes from venturebeat.com, and it's titled, "This is Why You Need to Learn How to Talk to Developers." When you go to this, we'll have a link in the show notes. The first thing you'll see visually is our Captain Jean-Luc Picard doing the famous head slap with his first captain that really conveys that notion of, man, when you don't necessarily talk effectively to each other, it can have disastrous implications. And part of the article just picks apart, what does it mean then to best talk from a developer's perspective to an end user and vice versa? And just to give you a sense of what the article's about, there's really two things. One is, and I'll just quote, "The rise in adoption paired with a decline in comprehension presents a major dilemma for software companies. How do you address public demand for short learning curves and simplified experiences while performing increasingly complicated tasks?" And I think the article really nets out that development is complex. So too are the business requests that are coming from the business to developers, and how they convey those things to each other in terms of what the technology is capable of and what the business is really trying to achieve. Those need to be very clear before any project, any code gets written. And so the article really picks into, well, when you say X, here's what actually a developer hears. And vice versa. Here's when a business problem is conveyed at a business level. It really needs to be very specific to developers in what it is they're trying to accomplish. So the article gives a lot of great examples of maybe not great ways to convey a problem or a problem statement. And vice versa, sometimes a developer can talk too complex in the actual how they're going to go about the solution, when really the business just needs, is it possible? Is there other teams that need to get involved? Are there other methods or even other samples and elements of code that are coming from the open source world that need to be brought in? So it's a great read. It's really on topic for what it is that we're trying to convey, which is that reality. When developers talk to end users and vice versa, users to developers, there's a unique language that they need to both be aware of and how to best get themselves across and how best to listen. So we'll put a link in the show notes. Hope you'll get a good read out of that. Give us your feedback, and certainly we'll always look to your articles and your areas of interest if you share them with us. While at the recent SharePoint Conference North America 2018 in Las Vegas, Chris McNulty and I had the pleasure of talking with Microsoft ecosystem partner Powell Software. We focused our discussion and questions, and of course they gave us a lot of great feedback in how they're using the SharePoint framework, how they're benefiting on having that great end-user experience, client-side development, and really what that means for what they're doing and offering to their customers on top of what we offer out of the box and giving unique custom solutions that feel blended, unique, and of course are very easy for them to develop. So let's take a listen to that conversation with Antoine and Juan. We are live here with Powell 365. I'm joined with Juan Larios and Antoine Faisandier. Faisandier?
Yes, correct.
Pretty good? Pretty close?
Very good.
Bonjour, merci beaucoup pour le temps aujourd'hui. But really first want to get your take. It's exciting to be here at the conference. Obviously, there's a lot of new announcements. And, there's a ton of announcements for users, a ton of announcements for IT. But we really wanted to drill on what you guys are doing with development. This episode really focuses on what we're doing for developers and how the maturity of the SharePoint framework is allowing you to do more and more. But tell us a little bit first about Powell 365, and then we'll get into the meat of developer.
We launched Powell Software in Europe. It was in fall 2015. We launched Powell Software in the US in February 2016. And actually the solutions that we are selling today, that we are offering to our partners and our customers, we released it in May 2016, so precisely 2 years ago. So actually for us, it's an important anniversary.
Congratulations.
Yes, and so we are very excited because over the past 2 years, we have been able to sell more than 130 customers. We have recruited more than 90 partners worldwide. Mm-hmm. And so we see a very strong uptick in our solution that fully lies on the Microsoft Office 365 SharePoint platform. Mm-hmm. And so, yes, we are very excited about the uptick and the growth moving forward.
So what's the first thing that a customer comes to you and says, I've reviewed what I can do out of the box. I've reviewed maybe what some other partners, maybe your competitors offer. And when they come to you knocking on the door, or they've read your website and talked to somebody else, what's the first thing they say? Hey, what I'm really interested to hear more about, what I've heard about Powell 365, where do they start with you?
This is Juan speaking. And I think we're in a category of the intranet in a box. And so when we first get a contact from customers or partners, they kind of are looking for a solution that kind of has pieced some of that functionality together and has optimized SharePoint to the best of its ability, has allowed them to brand and express their personal brand and their company brand better, more efficiently, faster, and then also to govern kind of their business process and the creation of content. So because we're in that group of intranet in a box, that's kind of the first approach, the first kind of ask that people are looking for.
But what piqued our interest is what actually you do from a development perspective. So they might not be thinking about developer, but from a SharePoint framework, a development on top of SharePoint perspective, we were really interested in how you're approaching the framework. So with where the classic publishing is, and now with modern framework, taking over.
Sure.
I'd love to hear a little bit more about your journey, and obviously we'll talk about futures in a second.
So this is Juan speaking. I think we started, like any other organization, really aiming at the publishing experience because it was the only one that was available. So a lot of the work that we did up front really resembled what the SharePoint framework is now. Mm-hmm. So a lot of our functionality of drag dropping things, resizing things from kind of an end user perspective and being able to give that power to end users without having to custom develop, we put that and we built that together. A lot of our customers ask me, what is your web part? What is the makeup of your web part? Is it an SPFX web part? Mm-hmm. And really then I start talking about what really is an SPFX web part. It's really a wrapper. It includes security, includes that stuff, but then it enables you to add your own JavaScript and your custom code. Essentially, we built the wrapper ourselves. Yep. We handled our security. We did all of that stuff. So we were, in a lot of ways, ahead of the curve. And then the modern framework came out and started to kind of parallel our functionality. And then we started to shift our approach to enabling the SPFX extensions and the SPFX web parts to kind of work natively within our design tool. So as you add those SPFX extensions, you can continue to make those development efforts while still using Powell. And it all kind of looks the same. It all looks like Powell, it behaves like Powell, deploys like Powell. So you can take advantage of all of that. So although there's that capability to drag drop things and no code solutions are there, there is that ability to kind of take it that step further and implement.
So if I heard you correctly, the patterns that sort of define good client-side development and obviously maybe just general web development that now play into the framework that democratize the approach, but certainly the patterns were already existing. How does that come into play when you think of the user experience? You mentioned that there's a commonality, like it just looks like Powell. And we would say the same thing in our solutions because we use that same framework, that we want it to be a consistent look and feel across Office 365. But from an intranet perspective, that's a pretty important thing for design, for user experience, for user interface. How flexible is the framework when you go from it looking like Powell 365 to look like how the customer wants it to look like?
And we go through a couple of different exercises into evaluating the branding effort that usually goes into any project. And we categorize them to scale 1 to 10 being the most complex to 1 being just Powell out of the box. Most customers don't want to reinvent the wheel. They understand that they're working with a product. They want to make the most of it. They want to brand it and make it look their own. But at the same time, they don't want to reinvent the wheel. So most projects that we've seen fall somewhere within the 4 to 6 scale. So it is an exercise of choosing the brand colors and the themes and the look and feel, defining page structures, and then making that consistent across the board. It is quite easy to do that in Powell Manager, which is our design tool that we have. And like I said, we provide that extra flexibility. You add CSS, or you add JavaScript, or you add SPFX web parts to play together to enhance that experience if you choose to do that.
So this is Chris talking. One thing we find with our customers, and I'm sure you find it with yours, is there's what I think of as the journey to value. There's a reason why they come to your platform in the first place, that they're trying to realize something, but there's a natural momentum of how that carries on and takes people to unexpected values kind of as they go on their journeys. What are some of the things that you found that customers kind of, are the unexpected delights of what customers have been able to do with your platform?
Well, I think the reusability of our package templates, I think there's a bit of a gap right now in 2 kind of areas in the new modern experience. Packaging up solutions that you can reuse across different site collections. There's site designs, yes. There's development effort that goes with that. And I think that users and organizations are looking for somewhere to industrialize templates and reuse them, to separate environments from development and production, and being able to do that quite easily and quickly and be able to test. So that's something that has been a big pain point when you invest a lot of custom development work to manage that development, to deploy it, to test it, to go across all the different testing development environments. So I think that whole process is simplified. So that's one. And I think the other is around governance. So a lot of the features that were introduced over the course of the conference were really about really putting the power in the hands of the users, but it's kind of reminiscent of the early stages of SharePoint, where it became anybody can do anything, and it became a mess. I think organizations are very careful right now to make sure that they can govern collaboration and spaces. So we offer that, and I think that they're quite happy with the governance that we provide and the standardization of templates.
At one point we thought SharePoint conference this year would be great to get everyone back and celebrate all the things we've already done. And that kind of went out the window when we announced a lot of things. What were some of the announcements that you heard yesterday that you're really excited about being able to use to augment the value you're already bringing to our customers?
Well, I think a lot of the features are very exciting, whether it's a simple list editing that was missing some key features that was really compelling. And I think it makes the platform more compelling to organizations, which plays really great for us because we build on top of it. So from that perspective, it's really nice. I think virtual reality is we're going to announce next week. We're going to implement that. I think that one was a bit maybe ambitious for us, but
Powell Spaces.
Powell Spaces, yes. Yeah, but that's exciting to see the platform grow. We also have a lot of customers that want the on-prem solution still, so it was really exciting to hear that 2019 was still on-prem. So that was good.
And yeah, I think it's very important to see that this modern experience is getting more mature, because there are actually many features that are expected from our clients, but we cannot leverage them yet in Powell 365. So sometimes you have to tell them, hey, the only solution for you, it is to stay on publishing. And more we'll be able to accelerate the move to modern thanks to what you have announced yesterday.
One of the things I wanted to ask you all, your take on the journey was, we announced the SharePoint framework, it did X and Y. And then, a couple months later, each quarter, some of the things we released to online, things we released to on-prem became more prevalent and more feature-rich. What does that mean for what you have developed in the past? And there's that concept of maybe we'll stop developing certain things. We always think of partners building on top of us, building on top of the platform, extending things that we haven't yet built or maybe won't. How do you think about that from anytime we make an announcement? Hopefully it's a good thing. But how do you manage that from a partner perspective?
So this is Juan speaking. A lot of the SPFX extensions and a lot of the things that were announced today, we're aware of just through the Dev Kitchen, and a lot of the things that we're doing now for modern, that is the path to adding extra functionality and extensions. So we've been working at implementing that. We've had conversations with the Microsoft dev team as well in terms of some of the special things that we're doing that we need Microsoft to kind of maybe prioritize or look into in terms of the way that we're using it that might actually become common in the Microsoft space and the way it's used. A lot of things around provisioning we've already done, but it gives us more flexibility to give users and organizations more flexibility to do more with our site designs and our site templates. So it's extra value. It's more that we can add to the table for sure.
We see that you are releasing more and more web parts. So for us, this is not an area where, this is not an area where we want to focus, because we think that web parts are becoming commonalities, and everybody can develop. This is not where the value of Powell 365 is, and that is why actually the value it is in Powell Manager. It is in this platform where both our partners and our clients, customers, they can really design, provision, manage, update all this repository of templates, site collections, navigation bar, themes, all that,
Last thing that I wanted to touch on, at least from what we announced yesterday, it's maybe a little bit, it's not off topic, but it's a different part of the intranet, and it's talking about the collaborative side. So Vesa Jehovan was up on stage, talked about how the SharePoint framework development experience can come into Microsoft Teams. So Microsoft Teams, the hub for teamwork, a lot of what we're doing with them is making sure you can bring SharePoint content in to the context of where people are having their discussions. With that context, they talked a lot about around the development experience now coming more and more, so that if you build it, you can put it in Teams and it'll have a really nice first run experience. How does that influence how you might think about addressing the overall needs of your customers' intranet?
This is Juan speaking. So we've seen kind of a blurring of the lines when it comes to just collaboration and kind of communication, where it's not easy to separate those two. And I think Teams is a great example of that, where both of those things can kind of live together and marry together. And I think that's how organizations are behaving now. So it's exciting to see that from our perspective. We still continue to augment that experience as well. We've been doing that for a while now in terms of pages and collaboration kind of mixed together. So it really falls in line with what we're doing as well. We're able to kind of get in there as well and add our web parts and our templates and our look and feel as well, and allow organizations to still build with us and to leverage it inside of teams. So it plays quite nicely with us as well. So we were excited to see that.
Yeah, there are actually all these communication and collaboration solutions in the Office 365 suite. There is, of course, SharePoint, but there is also Teams. There is also Yammer. All that supported by groups, okay? And our objective it is to help organization structure, templatize all that, okay? So definitely we are not limited to SharePoint, okay? We want to have, definitely Teams is part of, it is a key, it is a strategic workload within the Office 365 suite, and we definitely plan to handle it. So they can learn more by reaching out to us or by reaching out to our network of partners, and they will find all this information on our website. So if they Bing or if they Google Powell 365 or Powell Software, they will very easily find us. And we look forward to hearing from them and to working with them.
Excellent. And I think on Twitter, you guys are Powell 365 News.
Absolutely.
We'll put that all in the show notes.
All right.
Thank you for your time. Thanks for coming to the conference. Obviously, thanks for being in the expo hall. Hope you guys are getting a ton of traffic, tons of questions, a ton of customers, or at least future potential customers. But really, thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So let's move into FAQs of the week. Really, this week we've got one FAQ, and this one stems off of a recent announcement that we made that we covered last episode, and that we started to introduce the ability for you to connect your existing sites to new Office 365 groups. The big question is, what happens to my subsites when I connect the main site to a new Office 365 group? And the answer is they remain untouched. And certainly in the context of, well, what happens to them? Do they disappear? Of course, the answer is no. They carry forward. They're still a part of the site and the site structure, and they are still subsites of that now modernized site. The element, though, just for clarity, is the subsite itself doesn't get a new look and feel. It doesn't look modern. It still remains in a classic mode, which also means it just remains unchanged. So your users who've been using those subsites will have that same user experience. The value is trying to assert, well, what if these subsites could actually be a site of their own? It gives an opportunity to actually, from a migration perspective or just from an upgrade perspective, you could actually take one or all of those subsites and promote them to new sites of their own, which might be a move of content or just a structuring of creating a new site and moving some of those people and content in there in the nature of how you carry forward. So we think it gives an opportunity to think about moving into what is offered now a little bit more as a flat architecture, moving your subsites, promoting them as primary sites. But again, to get back to the question, your subsites don't go away and they do remain in classic mode. And that's our answer for this week's FAQ. To learn more about what Chris and I are sharing out to the world, you can certainly always follow us on Twitter. I'm at mcashman, and Chris is at cmcnulty2000. And of course, we're always sharing a ton from the SharePoint Twitter handle. So if you follow at SharePoint, you'll get a ton of announcements. You'll get a lot of upcoming events and certainly a lot of engagement based on questions that you have and ways that we can point you to either best people to reach out to or best articles to go read at a much more deeper level from a support perspective. So think in terms of Twitter as a great place for you to connect with either myself, Chris, or of course the whole SharePoint team. Both Chris and I are pretty active in the SharePoint community blog. So if you go to the Microsoft Tech community and go to the SharePoint community blog, you'll see a lot of the news announcements that we put out there. But we also put out articles that we think are just helpful in ways based on sometimes FAQs like we talk about in this episode, in these episodes, pointing you to things that will unblock you, provide clarity, and hopefully just point you to great content so that you can be as productive as possible. So definitely check out the SharePoint community blog in the Microsoft Tech community site. Thank you to our guests, Julie Turner from Sympraxis Consulting, and to Antoine Faisandier and Juan Larios from Powell Software. Be sure to check out their sites to learn more about their expertise and offerings, all of which can be found in our show notes on the podcast page at aka.ms/theintrozone. And keep up with what's going on throughout the year at a SharePoint Saturday near you. Visit spsevents.org for an event in your neighborhood. There's also SP Fest Seattle and SP TechCon Boston, both that are happening at the end of August 2018. And finally, don't forget to register for Ignite 2018 in Orlando, Florida. Signing up and registering will ensure that you get the latest insights from experts, both Microsoft, partners, and MVPs, shaping the future of teamwork and productivity. Go to Microsoft.com/Ignite and register today. We encourage you to send in your comments and questions for our SharePoint team and guests of the show. Send an email or voice memo to theintrozone@Microsoft.com or post a tweet to @SharePoint. Subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, SoundCloud, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you so much for listening. I'm your host, Mark Cashman, and this has been The Intrazone, a show about the SharePoint Intelligent Intranet.
Okay, it's official. We are very much in the final sprint to Election Day. And face it, between debates, polling releases, even court appearances, it can feel exhausting, even impossible to keep up with. I'm Brad Milkey. I'm the host of Start Here, the daily podcast from ABC News. And every morning, my team and I get you caught up on the day's news in a quick, straightforward way that's easy to understand, with just enough context so you can listen, get it, and go on with your day. So, kickstart your morning. Start smart with Start Here and ABC News, because staying informed shouldn't feel overwhelming.